Habemus Papam, everyone! The Catholic Church officially has a new pope, and he's taken the name of Pope Leo XIV. But who is this new pope? What do we know about Robert Francis Prevost, and what can we expect from him in the coming months and years? Well, let's find out. Hello, and welcome to Saints Skeptics. This is a podcast where we discuss common questions about the Catholic faith, the history of the church, the lives of saints and church doctors. We'll talk about theology, philosophy, and a whole lot more. My name is Michael Ryan. I'm so grateful that you've joined us on today's episode because we get to talk about a new Pope of the Catholic Church, Robert Francis Prevost, who's taken the name of Pope Leo XIV. So today, we're going to give you a general overview of his upbringing, his time as a priest, of course, his journey to becoming the Pope and what that looked like. We're also going to talk a little bit on some of the most common questions and maybe misconceptions revolving around the new Pope, specifically in regards to his stance on certain hot button issues, as well as his political leanings. This has been a huge topic, understandably so, over the past few weeks and months since his election as Pope. So that's something that I wanted to try to touch on today. Before doing so, I do think it's pretty important to point out that throughout this episode, we'll be referring to the Pope in many different ways, including but not limited to Pope Leo, His Holiness, the Holy Father, the Pope, etc. Please rest assured that regardless of what title is being used, I'm referring to our new and current Pope, Robert Francis Prevost, who's taken the name of Pope Leo XIV. And I am speaking of him with the most reverent intentions possible, I promise you. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started. So Pope Leo XIV, he was born September 14th, 1955, and he was born in the south side of Chicago. He's one of three sons to his mother, Mildred, and his father, Louis Prevost, both of whom were educators in the Chicago area. So his mother was actually a librarian for a long time, and his father was not only an educator, but he was also a World War II veteran. And get this, his father took part in the invasion of Normandy on D-Day, which is really intense. So he was the youngest member of the family, and as a child, he was affectionately known as Rob. So during this time, his childhood home was located in the town of Dalton, Illinois. So this is a town that's kind of almost directly south of Chicago. It's about 10 minutes from the Indiana border if you're just going west from the Indiana border. And luckily for him and for all of us who are listening who have experienced this, his parents were staunch Catholics. And they worked tirelessly from the very beginning to raise their children in the Catholic faith. So meaning that his family attended the parish of St. Mary of the Assumption, and his parents were incredibly involved with this parish. So they were actually credited with starting the St. Mary's Library at the church. And this was originally located at the time in the basement of an old school building. But as time moved forward and as St. Mary's expanded, they moved the library into the new building that the church expanded into. So there was actually, of course, as it happens when a new pope is elected, they try to go back and they try to interview members of their family or people that they used to know or that they grew up around. And so when interviewing some of the parishioners of St. Mary's regarding the Prevost family, they noted that they were kind of one of the pivotal families that were responsible for ensuring that the parish kept running. They talked about how they were a constant presence both at the church and at the school that was attached to and associated with the church. And so basically everyone unanimously stated that not only was Pope Leo involved a lot as well, but that his parents and his brothers were also involved, a lot in the church throughout their life and as they were growing up. And then, of course, coming from a family of educators, so his mother and his father both being involved in the field of education, I can imagine that it's no huge surprise to find out that Pope Leo was an exceptional student. Oftentimes, actually, he was the number one student in the class, if not, somewhere in the top. And that was throughout grade school, middle school, and high school as well. During high school, he actually attended St. Augustine High School. And this is where he kind of really took off in his studies. So not only was he getting amazing grades, but he was also doing a ton of extracurricular stuff as well. So he was the yearbook editor-in-chief, he was secretary of the student council, he was captain of the bowling team, and there was a whole bunch of other things that were listed too. And I'm reading through all these and I'm like, this is the most accomplished high school student I have ever heard of. So yeah, props to him for all of that. And so he went through high school, right? Graduated top of his class. After graduating, he traveled to outside Philadelphia to Villanova. And he went to Villanova for two main reasons. The first one is because it's an Augustinian institute, but the second one is because he wanted to study mathematics. And so Villanova being one of the best universities in the United States of America, and mathematics being one of the most difficult degrees to obtain, means that not only was Pope Leo intelligent, but he was also incredibly driven and incredibly focused. And this is something that I think we'll see over the course of his life that continues to play a part as time goes on. Villanova, being in Augustinian college, allowed the Pope to, or I should say future Pope at the time, to continue to deepen his connection with that order. And so this connection had begun for him in high school, and he wanted to continue it as time moved forward. He graduated from Villanova in 1977, and he got a Bachelor's of Science in Mathematics, which is what he was working towards. And then he immediately basically joined the Order of St. Augustine as a novice. And this is where you could say that his career in the Catholic Church really began. Kind of random side note here. Being from the United States, specifically from the East Coast, it's always interesting that in Florida, there is the town of St. Augustine, and it's pronounced St. Augustine, and I've been there multiple times, and it's absolutely gorgeous. But it's St. Augustine, which is so difficult sometimes in my brain to kind of reverse that and be like, okay, it's the Order of St. Augustine, not the Order of St. Augustine. Weird and random, but I think about that all the time when I'm speaking about these, specifically St. Augustine, because I'm like, this is difficult for my brain to comprehend the change, and I'm not sure why they're pronounced different ways. But anyway, side note, let's talk about his career here. So basically, like I mentioned, right out of college, Pope Leo joined the Order of St. Augustine. And in that order, as in many orders, you spend your first year as a novice. And so this year is intended to be an introduction, if you will, to the Augustinian way of life. It's a period where you can undergo kind of a process of inner searching. You can really make sure that this is something that you understand, something that you want to do, that you want to be a part of. Because of his time with the Augustinians in high school, my guess is that he kind of already had a pretty good idea of who the Augustinians were and what he was getting himself into. I'm also guessing that's one of the reasons why he joined their order rather than becoming, say, like a Dominican or a Franciscan or something. He had been introduced to the Augustinians already, and so he had an idea of what that was like, and he must have liked it because he wanted to continue doing it as time went on. But regardless of how much he already knew or how involved he had already been in his, high school years, being a novice is part of the program nonetheless. You don't have a choice. So for this year period, he resided in St. Louis, actually, in Missouri. And he was attached to the Immaculate Conception Church and Rectory, which sadly, when I was kind of doing research on all this, I found out that it doesn't exist anymore. It's actually no longer in operation. Apparently, there were financial difficulties, as there are with a lot of different churches and parishes. And so this Church of the Immaculate Conception was actually closed, and it was sold off to new owners. I actually think if I remember correctly, I think it went for sale again last year. So it's still kind of being sold around. Okay, so after this novitiate period, what goes next? Well, you take your what's called first vows. And so this would be sometime around 1978. And then afterwards, you make your solemn vows. And what these vows are is this is the lifelong perpetual vows in the Augustinian order. And these occurred for him, for Pope Leo, in 1981. So that same year that he took these solemn vows, he was ordained as a deacon. And then the following year, so we're talking 1982 now, he was ordained as a priest. So basically, take your solemn vows, then become a deacon, then become a priest. And his priestly ordination was actually somewhat unique because it took place in Rome. And the reason for this is that he had traveled to Rome to attend the Angelicum, which is the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. And he was going there to pursue a degree in canon law. So as if he hadn't already done enough school or hadn't done enough difficult intellectual pursuits, he decided to go get a degree in Rome in canon law. And so he officially became a priest while also studying for a degree in canon law, which must have been super busy, a very busy and difficult time in his life, because a degree in canon law is no joke. It's comparable to just a regular law degree, like becoming a lawyer. And so dedicating your life to the service of God and the church is also very difficult and no joke, and, requires a lot of thought and a lot of time. So yeah, again, props to the Pope for being able to do all of that at one time in 1 year of his life, because that's a lot and that's pretty intense for almost anybody who would go through it. So his studies in canon law, they lasted for a little while. It was until around like 1984 is what I could find. And when he completed that, his next assignment was to the Augustinian mission, one down in northern Peru. And although this initial assignment, it only lasted for somewhere around a year, this is actually what first introduced him to the Latin and more specifically the South American region, which would end up being a significant role and contributor to his entire life, this region of the world. So in 1987, so this is around a year or so after going down to the mission in Peru, he actually returned back to the United States. So went from Rome to Peru, and now he's going back to the United States. And he's working as the vocations and missions director for the Augustinian province covering Illinois at the time. So he was pretty close to home, or at least where he grew up in Chicago. And he had been moved back there because they needed someone to take over as this vocations and missions director. And, they thought that he would be a good fit for that. I believe that that was the case as well. The following year, so just about a year after that, now we're 1988, I believe, he went back to Peru. So now we're talking Rome to Peru to the United States to Peru. This is all over like a 5-year time period. And this time he returned to Peru to assist with the Augustinian mission in Torrio. And this location ended up becoming his home for a little while. It gave him some stability instead of all the moving around. It was about 11 years that he stayed in this mission parish here. And during that time, he held a huge range of different titles. He was prior of the community. He was formation director. He was instructor for professed members. And in the Archdiocese of Torrio itself, he actually served as a judicial vicar. And then if that wasn't enough, right, if he didn't have enough titles and enough going on, he was the professor of canon law, patristics, moral theology at the major seminary San Carlos y San Marcelo. And so he was teaching while also having some of these positions. And a lot of these positions, it was kind of like one position. Like, so for example, prior to the community, he was prior to the community for around 4 years, after which he did some more about the formation director, etc. So it's not like he was all of these at the same time. The point is just to show that during this 11-year period, he held lots of different titles and did lots of different things. While this was occurring, he was also entrusted with pastoral care of Our Lady Mother of the Church, which was later established as the parish of St. Rita. And this was in a really poor suburb of the city. And so he was doing this in conjunction with a lot of his other different tasks that he had going on. And then, again, if it wasn't enough, from 92 to 99, so a part of this 11-year period that he was in this mission in Peru, he was actually the parish administrator of Our Lady of Montserrat as well. So I'm just going to list it from the top. We've got, over the course of this 11-year period, we've got prior to the community, formation director, instructor for professed members, right? Judicial vicar, professor of canon law, patristics, and moral theology. He was also entrusted with pastoral care of a church, helped establish a parish, and was parish administrator of an entire church. So that is obviously a mouthful and quite a lot to accomplish over the course of around a decade or so. But like we learned from his childhood, Pope Leo's no slouch. He's willing to put in the work. He's willing to put in the time, and he did, and it shows for sure. So all of this takes us to around 1999. And this is when he moved back to the United States. He was elected as prior provincial of the Order of St. Augustine's Province of Our Mother of Good Counsel. So this is the province that is based around Chicago, Illinois. It's like their Midwest province, if you will. And the Augustinians, they wanted to have him come back as prior provincial. And so this role lasted for him from 1999 until about 2001. So it was 2 years or so. And then the Pope was again elected to the position of prior, but this time it was prior general. And this is a big step up, since this means that he's now in charge of the supervising of the entire order of St. Augustine. So all of the provinces and everyone in them, he was in charge of administrating to everything. So he held this role for the standard 6-year term, and then he was actually reelected and immediately served a second 6-year term as prior general again. So that means that for 12 consecutive years, between 2001 and 2013, Pope Leo was the prior general of the Order of St. Augustine. So during this time, as prior general, he resided in Rome. But of course, as the job would require, he traveled a lot. Once his second 6-year term was kind of coming to a close, he actually moved back to the United States again, but this was for a very short period of time. He served as the director of formation at the convent of St. Augustine in Chicago. And at this time, he was also first counselor and provincial vicar of the province of Our Mother of Good Counsel. So if you remember, this is kind of that like Midwestern province around Chicago that the Augustinian order has. So during this period, his relationship with Pope Francis had been getting closer and closer and increasing over time. And during this period, he was actually selected by Pope Francis to become the apostolic administrator of the Diocese of Chiclayo in northern Peru. And during this time, he was also given the honorary title of titular bishop of Sofar. And I found this to be really fascinating because canon law requires a bishop to be attached or assigned to a specific diocese. And so for individuals that the Pope wants to be a bishop who are in roles that are not directly assigned to a specific parish, so they can't really become a bishop. So this would be something like individuals serving in the Vatican's diplomatic corps, maybe you're like an auxiliary bishop or something like that. You're not established and directly assigned to a specific parish. It's difficult to become a bishop because canon law requires that you're assigned to a specific parish, right? And so you can be granted by the Pope this title of titular bishop of Sufar, because Sufar is an area in North Africa that was once a huge hub for Christianity. This was during like Roman times, a Byzantine era, and now it's no longer functioning as such, sadly. So the title is used to allow individuals to become a bishop, because it's got like a historical title, and it's more of like a ceremonial title. It's got historical accuracy related to it, although that area is no longer like a hotbed for Christianity. It's and it's not associated with a specific diocese anymore. It's a way that the Pope can elevate someone to being a bishop honorarily without them actually having to be associated to a specific diocese, which I thought was pretty cool. I didn't even know that existed. Now, in Pope Leo's case, since he was assigned to the Diocese of Chiclayo, it was only a short period of time that he held this honorary title, because in 2015, he was actually named the Bishop of Chiclayo itself. And so he had this honorary title for a very short period of time, but I still thought it was relatively cool. And so he held this position, this new position as full bishop, from 2015 until 2023. And during this time, he accomplished a lot, just like he did in the last 11-year period that we talked about. And he was still incredibly involved, not only in the local diocese, but he was also incredibly involved in the church as a whole. So, for example, just to list a few things that happened during this period of being bishop. In March of 2018, he was elected second vice president of the Peruvian Episcopal Conference, where he also served as a member of the Economic Council and president of the Commission for Culture and Education. So a whole bunch of different things there. Then in 2019, so a year later, Pope Francis appointed him a member of the Congregation of the Clergy. And then in 2020, 1 year after that, he was appointed a member of the Congregation of Bishops. And then lastly, in April of 2020, he was also appointed apostolic administrator of the Peruvian Diocese of Cayo. And so this takes us to somewhere around 2023-ish, where Pope Francis called him to Rome to work as prefect of the Dicastery for Bishops and president of the Pontifical Commission for Latin America. And so this prompted his promotion to the rank of archbishop. So he was doing a ton of stuff down in Peru, was a part of a lot of different commissions, multiple different congregations, etc. But I think the way that it worked as time went forward, Pope Francis really saw a lot in him, and he knew that he wanted to remain close to him, and he knew that he wanted to kind of tap into what he had to offer in order to get some additional help in these positions in Rome, where Pope Francis really needed kind of like A players. And so in 2023, he was called back to Rome, right? In 2024, Pope Francis made him a cardinal. And so he was specifically made a cardinal deacon, which is one of the 3 different levels of cardinals, right? And so those 3 levels include cardinal bishops, cardinal priests, cardinal deacons, pretty similar to just traditional church structure. And this doesn't mean that he was like demoted or something to being a deacon or anything. What this means is that he was in the first stages or, ranks, if you will, of the cardinalate. And so in this position, he was assigned authority over what's called a deaconry. And what this means is it's like a specific church in Rome that is symbolically connected to each of the cardinal deacons. So like in Pope Leo's case, his deaconry was the chapel of St. Monica of the Augustinians, St. Monica being the mother of St. Augustine. And so this is directly south of the Vatican in Rome. And this was kind of something that he was symbolically connected with and a part of during his period as a cardinal deacon. Now, 2 years later in 2025, this is early 2025, Pope Francis promoted him to cardinal bishop. And then, sadly, within a few months after that promotion, Pope Francis passed away. So this brings us now to the conclave, where a new pope is to be elected, right? And our future pope, Pope Leo, who we're discussing here, he was really barely even on the radar, at least as far as what we know outside of the closed doors of the conclave. He was barely on the radar. And it's not that he wasn't liked or that people didn't think he would do a good job. It's actually the opposite. People really did like him and they thought he would do a great job. It's just that he wasn't seen as being one of the more prominent candidates for Pope. And it's reported that there was some significant concern about the fact that he was American, since some people in the conclave reportedly held, I guess you would call it unease about potentially enhancing the geopolitical power of the United States. Being the Pope is a pretty big deal. And so having that attached to your country does come with some form of geopolitical power. And apparently the report is some people were a little bit worried about that. That being said, he was seen as being a really strong candidate. And this was due to a wide range of reasons, but primarily because A, he had a magnificent career within the church. B, he had unwavering faith and complete dedication to God throughout his entire life and his career. And then C, he had a close friendship with Pope Francis. And so Pope Francis knew him very well and trusted him a lot, right? On top of all of that, he was kind of known for his calm and reserved demeanor, which I think a lot of people really resonated with. So because of those reasons, and I'm sure a huge range of other reasons that we don't know anything about, and we probably will never know anything about, after 2 days of conclave, he was elected Pope, and he officially took the name of Pope Leo XIV. And so that kind of brings us to where we are today, right? What a crazy journey from attending Mass in the mornings before grade school to becoming Pope of the Catholic Church. That's an amazing story. And just like that was, however many minutes of me just talking through all of the things that he had done and accomplished. And I'm sure there were multiple things that I glossed over, but man, what a career, what a story to go and do all of these things in all of these places, living in all these countries, traveling all over the world, helping to run and start different parishes, helping to run different organizations. He has been involved in so much. And it's crazy to think that all of that led him to being the Pope. It's an amazing story, right? So I can't imagine what it's like to actually live it. I'm saying it and it sounds crazy. So I can't really imagine what it's like to live it. But Regardless, let's talk about some questions, right? Let's even touch on maybe some misconceptions about the Pope because he's in the news a lot. And people talk about him a lot now, as you would expect with a Pope. So let's see what we can find, right? So one of the things that I saw a lot is the talk of, is Pope Leo XIV the first American Pope? And I saw this come up a lot right after his election. And the short answer is yes. Pope Leo is the first American Pope. He's not the first Pope from the Americas. That would be Pope Francis, who is from Argentina. But he is the first Pope from the United States of America. So just like somebody from Australia would be called an Australian, or people from Canada are Canadian, people from the United States of America are American. So it's a small but significant clarification there where he is the first American Pope, but he is not the first Pope from the Americas, since the Americas include North America, Central America, and South America, right? And so since Pope Francis was from South America, he's not the first Pope from the Americas, but he is the first American Pope. He's the first Pope from America. So again, very small distinction there, but pretty important. I saw a lot of people being like, no, he is not, definitely not. I'm like, he is. He is the first one from the United States of America, meaning he is an American, and he is the first one. How many languages does he speak? A lot. I'd love for you to take a second and guess. Way more than I do. So in addition to his native language of English, he speaks Spanish, Italian, French, Portuguese, and German. And then on top of all of that, again, if that wasn't enough, he can also read Latin. So speaking fluently, we can say for certain at least 3, maybe even more. English, Spanish, Italian, absolutely fluent, 100%. French, Portuguese, German, we'll say that, just some fluency in those because I'm not 100% sure if he's completely fluent in those. But we're looking around 6 or so languages in total, which for someone like myself who has yet to even master the English language, that seems like quite the impossible feat. Again, very intelligent man since childhood. But yeah, so English, Spanish, Italian, 100% fluent. And then French, Portuguese, German, I'm not sure the fluency level, but I imagine it's relatively high. Is Pope Leo young for a pope? A lot of people were saying, wow, what a young pope. That's awesome. That is true. He's somewhat young for a pope. Pope Leo is 69 when he was elected pope. And so that means that he's younger than our past 2 popes. Pope Francis was elected at the age of 76. Pope Benedict was elected at the age of 78. But John Paul II, who was, the one before that, was actually 58 when he was elected the Pope. And then John Paul I, who was right before John Paul II, was 65, both of which are younger, of course, than Pope Leo. So he's not the youngest by any means, but he's also definitely not the oldest. The youngest pope in history, they were around the early medieval period, and I think during this time, age restrictions weren't really a part of it. The episcopal requirements didn't really exist, and so apparently Pope John the 12th was said to be in his late teens, maybe early 20s at like the latest. So that is, as you can guess, incredibly young. And that's all to say that, if you consider the entire history of the church, Pope Leo would not be considered super young. But if you look at the recent history of the church, he's pretty young in comparison. All things considered, he's relatively young. Also seems like he's in great shape from everything that you can tell. Walks, moves, speaks very well. I saw some interviews with his brothers where they were talking about how he's very athletic and he likes to get around and do stuff. So yeah, relatively young, spry for a pope, which is great. Okay, so maybe we should take a second here to talk about some of these hot button topics that I mentioned earlier, right? I've been seeing a lot about this. This is kind of the number one thing that you see about, Pope Leo since his election, which is kind of sad because it's instead of talking about his general character or instead of talking about his faith or his dedication to God, oftentimes the discussion is, what does he think about this? Or what does he think about that? Because that's just what we've been molded to think is the most important things in our lives these days. And there's a lot of confusion here about what Catholics in general even stand for, let alone the Pope. So I tried to dig in here some and just find some more definitive answers. So let's start with politics. What political party does Pope Leo support? Does he lean right or does he lean left or what? Well, shockingly enough, in a culture where for some reason your political leanings have become your personal identity for a lot of people, Pope Leo seems to have avoided that altogether. He is very much a moderate or a centrist, right? And he's neither liberal nor conservative. And I found that this is actually one of the main reasons for his election as Pope in the first place. He is appreciated by both progressives and conservatives within the church due to his more reserved approach and his ability to remain kind of center of the aisle. Maybe another way to look at this is that he lets his actions be directed by God, not by a political party, which is incredibly refreshing to see. So, which one does he support? Neither. He's in the middle. What about gay marriage, or what about homosexuality in general? What does Pope Leo think about that? You'll find that with this question, along with multiple others that come after this, the answer is kind of the same. Pope Leo is Catholic. Shocking, I know. And same-sex marriage is not supported by the Catholic Church, full stop. So when asked recently about his position on the issue and others like it, he's reported as having emphasized that the church should be more open and it should be more welcoming, though he cautioned that church doctrine has not changed, right? So that makes perfect sense. What about thoughts on gender ideology? What about thoughts on people who are transgender, for example, right? In one of his first addresses to the public since he became Pope, he stated that it was up to governments to build peaceful societies, and then he's quoted as saying, above all, by investing in the family founded upon the stable union between a man and a woman. Again, touching on his quote from the last question, right? He's aiming for inclusivity within the church while retaining church doctrine and scripture, I should add, that strictly states that there are two genders, man and woman. Again, completely shocking that the Pope would follow scripture and church doctrine, right? How about abortion, euthanasia, the death penalty, assisted suicide, etc.? Pope Leo stands with the church on these issues as well. He has publicly commented that he opposes any and all forms of the disregard for human life. He's affirmed many times that the church's stance is rooted in the belief that every human life, from the unborn to the elderly, is sacred. So I'm just going to stop there. There are plenty more of these hot button issues to go through, right? Like, how does he feel about, like, what I have gun rights here, immigration, racism, nationalism, climate change, on, et cetera, right? The reality is that although I could take the time to break down each one of these, it would be incredibly boring since the answer is pretty much always the same for all of them. Pope Leo is a Catholic, the leader of all Catholics to be exact, and because of this, he follows the teachings of the Catholic Church. And so it always amazes me, and it also saddens me to a degree, when I hear people talking about how he might be the first pope to support abortion, or maybe he'll come out and he'll change the church teachings on same-sex marriage or something, right? It shows that people have not taken the time to fully understand the Catholic faith and how it all works. So what I would say is, for anyone who might be interested and wondering, like, I wonder what Pope Leo thinks about this, or I wonder what his stance on this are, I would encourage you to reference the Catechism of the Catholic Church, the Holy Bible, and canon law. And if you read those documents and you look at those, you will get a better understanding of what the Catholic faith really stands for, because I can assure you it is directly in line with what the Pope stands for as well. All right, so that's basically it. That about wraps us up. I hope this was able to give you a little bit more insight into kind of how he became Pope in the first place, as well as maybe some of his thoughts on these more misunderstood topics that we often hear about. Always try to remember, when you read something that seems off or incorrect in regards to the Pope, that it's always best to do your own research. We get these headlines all the time now that are like, I don't even know, they'll say something crazy. They'll be like, Pope Leo has publicly stated for the first time that he believes that abortion might be acceptable, or something like that, right? And I'm guilty of it as much as anyone, but we all read headlines, and then oftentimes we don't read the article. Or if we do read the article, it's from a really bad source that's just lying to us. And so next thing you know, you're going to a party somewhere or something, or you're in an elevator or wherever, right? And somebody, you hear them saying, yeah, did you hear that Pope Leo is actually going to be open to abortion? Because everyone's just starting to repeat these same lies and read these same headlines, and it starts to spiral and get out of control. I would say that you should really try to look at what is being said and why, and then compare that to what the church teaches and see what you come up with. The devil isn't called the father of lies for no reason, right? And there's no one on earth that he hates more than our Pope. So just keep your wits about you when you hear or read things about the Pope and the faith in general. And remember, never stop praying for him as he guides the church over this next period of time, because he's got one heck of a job ahead of him, right? So As always, I just want to say that I'm so grateful that you've joined me for today's episode. I really hope that you'll consider coming back and joining me again in the next one, or going back and listening to some of our past episodes as well. Please know that every day before I start recording these episodes, I sit in prayer for, some sort of designated period of time. I shoot for at least half an hour, sometimes more, sometimes less. During that prayer time, I always try to remember to pray for everyone that is listening to these episodes. Regardless of what you're going through, please know that God is there for you and that I am praying for you. Please remember as well that God is calling you, right? He's calling you in his own special way, and he wants you to grow closer to him by listening to things like this, by reading scripture, by learning more about the faith, right? Whatever it is, he wants you to experience his grace, his love, his divine mercy. So please continue down that path of growing closer towards God. As always, I'm your host, Michael Ryan. I'm going to leave you with this short blessing. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May he look upon you kindly, and may he give you peace. Have a blessed day, everyone, and I will see you all in the next episode.